There are people in this world who get judged the second they walk into a room, not by what they've done, not by what they know, by what they look like, by what they're wearing, by where they're standing when someone important walks in. This is a story about one of those people, and I promise you, by the time it's over, you'll never forget his name. The morning Harlan Briggs walked into Meridian General Hospital's parking garage at 6:47 a.m., nobody gave him a second glance. That was the point. He drove a 2009 Civic with a cracked rear bumper. He wore a gray zip-up hoodie, dark jeans worn thin at the knees, and a pair of beat-up New Balance sneakers. He was 31 years old, lean, with close-cropped hair going gray early at the temples, something that made him look older and younger at the same time, depending on how you looked at him. He carried a paper coffee cup in one hand and a manila folder in the other. He moved through the hospital lobby without looking at anyone directly, the way a man does when he knows exactly where he's going and doesn't need to announce it. Nobody stopped him. Nobody greeted him. Nobody wondered who he was. That was fine with him. What nobody in that lobby knew, what nobody in the city knew, except for a handful of people who would never say it out loud, was that Harlan Briggs held 3 board certifications in cardiovascular and thoracic surgery, had performed over 400 open-heart procedures before the age of 29, and had been the lead surgeon on a trial protocol that had been quietly adopted by 7 major medical centers across the country. He was not there to operate. He was there to fix a broken ventilation unit on the 4th floor, because for the last 14 months, Harlan Briggs had been working as a hospital maintenance technician. And the story of why that was, that's not a simple story. But it starts the same way a lot of unfair things start, with one man's pride, one signature, and one lie told at exactly the right moment to exactly the right people. His name was Dr. Clifford Renshaw. Clifford Renshaw was 54 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and the kind of man who wore his authority like a second skin. He was chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Meridian General, the youngest in the hospital's history to hold the title, a fact he had not stopped mentioning since the day he got it. He had deep-set eyes the color of gunmetal, a handshake firm enough to leave an impression, and the practiced smile of a man who has spent decades making rooms defer to him before he'd even spoken a word. He and Harlan had worked together for 18 months at Western Presbyterian Medical Center across town. In that time, Harlan had closed 4 cases that Renshaw had failed to solve. He had done it quietly, without drama, without credit-seeking. He had simply done the work. That was the problem. Renshaw was not a man who tolerated being outshined, especially not by someone 20 years his junior, especially not in front of the hospital board. When Harlan's contract came up for renewal at Western Presbyterian, Renshaw had made one phone call, then another. The details of what was said in those calls, Harlan would not learn for another year. What he did learn, on a Thursday afternoon, in a conference room that smelled of old carpet and burnt coffee, was that his privileges were being suspended pending review, that a complaint had been filed alleging procedural misconduct, and that the review board would take 90 to 120 days. There was no misconduct. There never was any misconduct. But the review board was slow, and Rent was not, and Harlan Briggs was not a man who asked for help. He had grown up without the luxury of that. So he found work, a hospital, even if it wasn't operating on him. Maintenance paid $22 an hour, offered benefits, and kept him close to the only environment he'd ever felt at home in. He told himself it was temporary. 14 months later, the review was still pending, and Harlan Briggs was still fixing ventilation units. The call came at 11:23 a.m. Harlan was on the 4th floor, panel open, wrist deep in a relay housing that had been throwing error codes for 3 days when his radio crackled. Maintenance. This is Cynthia at the ICU charge desk. We've got a flooding issue in the sub-utility corridor below OR3. Can someone get down here? He keyed the radio. I've got it. 2 minutes. He was in the elevator before the radio finished crackling. The sub-utility corridor beneath OR3 was not technically in OR3. But the hallway connected directly to the OR's secondary access, a service door used for equipment transfers, not people. When Harlan pushed through the door at the end of the corridor, he expected to see a burst pipe. What he saw instead stopped him cold. A woman was on the floor. She was young, 26, maybe 27, and she was clearly pregnant, and she was in trouble. Her name, Harlan would learn later, was Delia Foss. 27 years old, 34 weeks along, with dark auburn hair plastered against a pale face that had gone the color of candle wax. She was conscious but barely, one hand pressed to her abdomen, her breathing shallow and wrong in a way that Harlan recognized before his brain had fully processed what his eyes were seeing. Two nurses were with her, crouched on either side, both of them talking into phones simultaneously. A crash cart had been pushed against the wall. And standing in the middle of it all, arms crossed, was Dr. Clifford Renshaw. Renshaw had been passing through on his way to a board meeting when the nurses had grabbed him. He was the most senior physician on this floor at this moment. He was, in theory, the most qualified person in the room. He had not moved toward Delia. He was watching her the way a man watches a problem he's already decided isn't his problem. Harlan read the monitors in 3 seconds. He read the placement of her hand, the positioning of her body, the way she was trying to stay still. He read the nurses' faces. And then something inside him shifted from civilian to surgeon so fast that he was already moving toward Delia before he'd consciously decided to. "Who's managing her airway?" he asked. One of the nurses, a younger woman with a name badge that said Tessa, looked up at him and blinked. "We're waiting for OR3 to clear." "What's her pressure?" Tessa glanced at the monitor. 84/40. "How long has it been at that level?" "Maybe 8 minutes." Harlan looked at Delia. Delia looked back at him with the glazed, specific terror of someone who knows something is very wrong and is trying to hold very still so it doesn't get worse. "Hey," he said quietly, "I need you to stay with me." "Can you do that?" She nodded once, just barely. He stood up and turned to Tessa. "She's presenting with acute placental abruption. She needs surgical intervention in the next few minutes, not the next 20. Is the attending OB in-house?" Tessa stared at him. "The attending OB," he said again, steady, no edge to it. "Is she in-house?" "Dr. Kamara is in OR1. She's mid-case. Get her on the intercom, now." He looked at the second nurse. "What's your name?" "Angela." "Angela, I need 2 units O-negative and a surgical kit from the supply room to your left. Can you move?" Angela moved, and that was when Clifford Renshaw stepped forward. "Excuse me." Harlan turned. Renshaw looked at him the way he looked at everyone he considered beneath him, with a particular combination of boredom and irritation, like a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence at a dinner party by someone who hadn't been invited. "Who are you?" Renshaw said. "Maintenance," Harlan said. It was not a performance. It was simply the truth of what he was at this moment in this building. Renshaw's expression shifted into something colder. "Then I'm going to need you to step back. This is a medical situation. I'm aware of that. Then you understand why a maintenance worker has no business being in this hallway right now." Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Delia, then back at Renshaw. "With respect, doctor, her pressure is dropping. If she doesn't get into an OR in the next few minutes, she's going to code, and so will the baby." Renshaw's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for your assessment. I know you didn't. I need you to leave this area, right now." Tessa was still watching Harlan. So was Angela, who had come back from the supply room with the kit and was standing in the doorway, not sure who to listen to. Harlan stood still. He had been here before, not in this hallway, not with this man, but in this moment, the moment where the path of least resistance was to step back, keep his head down, let someone else handle it. He had spent 14 months choosing that path. It had cost him nothing dramatic, just a slow accumulation of small surrenders. He looked at Delia again. She was looking at him with those glassy, terrified eyes, and she said something then, very quietly, barely above a breath. She said, "Please." Harlan turned back to Renshaw. "I'm Dr. Harlan Briggs," he said. It came out level, no inflection, no drama. I'm board certified in cardiovascular and thoracic surgery. I completed an OB emergency rotation at Johns Hopkins in 2018, and I've managed acute placental abruption in 2 prior cases. My license is currently under administrative review, which means I cannot operate without hospital authorization. He paused. So I'm asking you to give me that authorization, right now, because she is running out of time. The hallway went very quiet. Renshaw's face had gone through several things in the space of Harlan saying those sentences. Surprise. Calculation. Recognition. Not of Harlan specifically, but of what Harlan's credentials meant, what they implied about the conversation they'd been having 30 seconds ago. And then, because Clifford Renshaw was above all things a man who could not tolerate being positioned below anyone, even in private, even in an empty hallway, even when a woman was dying on the floor behind them, he said, "Get out." Harlan did not leave. What he did was go to Tessa and say quietly, "Who is the chief of staff right now? Who is physically in the building?" Tessa said, "Dr. Patricia Sue. She's in her office. 3rd floor." Harlan said, "Call her." He said it so calmly, so completely without panic, that Tessa reached for her phone before she'd finished deciding to. Renshaw moved toward Harlan then, lowering his voice in the way men do when they want to threaten without witnesses. "I don't know what kind of play you think you're making here," he said, "but I have been at this hospital for 11 years. I know every administrator, every board member, every department head, and I will make absolutely certain that you never work in any hospital in any capacity." "Sir," Angela said. Both men looked at her. Angela was pointing at the monitor. Delia's pressure had dropped again. 71/38, and then everything happened at once. The intercom crackled and Dr. Patricia Sue's voice came through, tight and professional. OR3 was being cleared. Dr. Kamara was being pulled from OR1, and she wanted to know who had assessed the patient as acute abruption, because if that assessment was correct, they had maybe 8 minutes to get her opened up. "That was me," Harlan said into the intercom. A pause. "This is Dr. Sue. Who am I speaking with?" "Harlan Briggs. Maintenance, 4th floor. Formerly attending cardiothoracic at Western Presbyterian. I have a pending review with the state board. I'll explain everything after. Right now I need authorization to assist Dr. Kamara in OR3. Another pause, shorter this time. "Get him scrubbed," Dr. Sue said. Renshaw said, "Patricia, you cannot seriously be Clifford." Dr. Sue's voice was very calm. "Get out of that hallway." What happened in OR3 over the next 41 minutes was not a miracle. It was skill. It was the application of 12 years of training and 400 prior procedures and a specific kind of muscle memory that doesn't go away just because someone files a complaint against you. It was Harlan and Dr. Amara Kamara, 43 years old, 2nd-generation Nigerian American, the best OB surgeon on the floor, moving in tandem with the efficient, wordless fluency of 2 people who have each spent decades in operating rooms, even though they'd never met before this moment. The baby came into the world at 12:09 p.m. Small, too small, but breathing. Delia coded once, briefly, and then came back. By the time Harlan walked out of OR3, still in scrubs, still gloved, he had been awake for 17 hours and had not eaten since 6 a.m. He sat down on a bench in the corridor and put his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He sat there for 4 minutes. Then he got up, went to the supply closet, changed back into his maintenance uniform, and went to find the burst pipe. He didn't know about Owen Foss until the next morning. Owen Foss was 49 years old, barrel-chested, with close-cropped, salt and pepper hair and the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now just formidable. He had built Foss Capital Partners from a 2-room office in Cincinnati into a private equity firm managing $11 billion in assets. He had a reputation for coldness, for precision, for saying exactly what he meant in the minimum number of words. He had also, it turned out, been sitting in a waiting room 40 feet from where his wife was dying, and nobody had told him that a maintenance worker had just walked in off a hallway and saved her life. He found out from Tessa. Tessa, to her credit, told him everything. She told him about Harlan's assessment. She told him about what Renshaw had said. She told him that Harlan had gone back to fix the pipe. Owen Foss sat very still while Tessa talked. Then he said, "What's his name?" "Harlan Briggs. Where is he right now?" "I don't know. Somewhere in the building." Owen Foss stood up. He was not a man who moved quickly, as a rule. He moved like a man who knew that wherever he was going would wait for him. He went to the maintenance desk on the first floor and asked for Harlan Briggs. The woman at the desk looked at him and said, "He's on 4, the HVAC relay." Owen Foss went to 4. When he found Harlan, Harlan was on his back on the floor of a mechanical room, halfway inside a duct housing, with a flashlight clenched between his teeth and a wrench in his right hand. Owen stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "Harlan Briggs." Harlan went still. Then he pulled himself out of the duct, sat up, took the flashlight out of his mouth. He looked at Owen Foss without recognition, without wariness, without any particular expression at all. "Yeah," he said. "My name is Owen Foss. Delia is my wife." Something crossed Harlan's face then. Not pride. Just something that relaxed slightly, the way a person looks when they hear that a thing they were worried about turned out okay. "She's doing well," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd checked the chart at 7 a.m. "She is," Owen said. "The baby is in the NICU. They say she'll be home in 3 weeks." Harlan nodded. Owen looked at him for a moment. He was trying to reconcile the man on the floor. Maintenance uniform, wrench in hand, flashlight teeth marks still visible, with what Tessa had described. He was finding that the reconciliation was not as difficult as he'd expected. There was something about Harlan Briggs that made it very easy to believe he was exactly what he said he was, and also something more. "I want to know why you're working maintenance in this hospital," Owen said. Harlan considered whether to answer. Then he decided that a man whose wife and child had just survived deserved a straight answer. He told him about Western Presbyterian, about the review, about the phone calls he couldn't prove Renshaw had made, about the 18 months of casework that had apparently threatened the wrong ego. He told it flatly. No self-pity, no embellishment, just the facts in the order they'd happened. Owen listened without moving. When Harlan finished, Owen said, "Do you have documentation of your credentials?" "Everything's on file with the state board. They're reviewing it." "How long has it been under review?" 14 months. Owen looked at the floor. Then he looked at Harlan. "I know people on the state medical board," he said. "I figured," Harlan said. "I also know the CEO of Western Presbyterian personally. We're on a foundation board together." Harlan said nothing. "I'm going to look into this," Owen said. "Not as a favor, as someone who wants to understand what happened." Harlan said, "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't," Owen said. "That's not the point." He put out his hand. Harlan looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. Owen left. Harlan put the flashlight back between his teeth and went back into the duct. What Owen Foss found when he started asking questions, very specific questions in very specific rooms to very specific people, was not subtle. It was not subtle at all. Renshaw had made 3 phone calls on the morning of the Western Presbyterian review. 1 to the board chair, 1 to the medical director, 1 to a former colleague who now sat on the state licensing review panel. The substance of those calls could not be legally proven, but the pattern of them, placed next to the timeline of Harlan's review, placed next to the specific language in the complaint, which used a phrase that appeared verbatim in a letter Renshaw had written 2 years prior in an unrelated matter, told a very clear story to anyone with the patience to read it. Owen Foss was a man who had spent 20 years reading stories that other people had tried to hide inside spreadsheets and contracts and phone records. He was very patient. The formal complaint to the state board took 3 weeks to prepare. It named Renshaw specifically. It included call records, the letter comparison, and testimony from 2 nurses who had, it turned out, been waiting for someone to ask them the right questions. Meridian General's board of directors convened a closed session. Renshaw was placed on administrative leave before the session ended. His attorney issued a statement about the complexity of hospital politics and a thorough review of the facts. Nobody quoted it in the follow-up coverage. Harlan's review was resolved in 31 days. His license was reinstated with a formal note of exoneration in his file. He did not call Owen Foss to thank him. Owen Foss did not expect him to. What he did receive, 6 weeks after the day in the mechanical room, was a letter. Typed, not handwritten, on plain paper. It said, "Delia and the baby are well. I trust you know that. I am writing to tell you that I've accepted a position at St. Clement's Medical Center effective the 1st of next month. I wanted you to hear it directly." H. Briggs, MD Owen, read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his desk. He was not a man given to sentimentality, but he kept that letter. There is a thing that happens sometimes in hospitals, in courtrooms, in corporate boardrooms, in every place where hierarchy has calcified into assumption, where the person with the most letters after their name is so certain of their own authority that they stop being able to see what is actually in front of them. Clifford Renshaw looked at a man in a maintenance uniform and saw nothing worth considering. He was so busy seeing nothing that he almost let a woman and her baby die. That's not a story about race, though race was part of it. It's not a story about class, though class was woven through every second of it. It's a story about what happens when a man's ego becomes more important to him than the truth standing right in front of his face. And it's a story about what happens when one person decides not to look away. Harlan Briggs could have walked past that hallway. He had been trained, by 14 months of small humiliations, to walk past things that weren't his assigned problem. He could have called it in and let someone else deal with it. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have even known. He didn't, and I think about that a lot. I think about what it costs a person to stay who they are when the world has spent over a year trying to convince them they're something less. Harlan Briggs walked into that hospital every morning carrying everything he knew, everything he'd built, everything that had been taken from him. And he still showed up. He still did the work. He still saw the woman on the floor and moved toward her instead of away. That's not a small thing. That's actually the only thing. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the person in the room that no one thought to ask, if you've ever had to prove yourself in a place that had already decided what you were, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. And if you believe that the people who keep showing up deserve to be seen, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll be back with another story soon. Until then, don't let anyone decide what you're worth before they've seen what you can do.